First of all, let me welcome everybody. Welcome back to another mini session. We are now on session, I think we're in session 17. We had to do some switcheroos last time because the EPARs and we had some scheduling issues. So EPARs is next week, but today we're going to be working on employee garnishments. My name is Mike Martinez with the Maricopa County School Superintendent's Office. Next to me is Miss
Carrie Gunderson.
Carrie, how long have you been doing garnishments?
Over 20 years.
Over 20 years, and you've
Over
been
20
here for
years.
about 5 years, right?
Correct.
All right, so you've been doing garnishments for quite a long time. It's one of those like sort of niche areas that every business needs to know in some way or another. So we're going to kind of go through a little bit of everything for garnishments today. We're going to start off with some of the setup features. A lot of you, if you are using the garnishment module, already have a lot of these items set up. So we're going to walk through the setup of a couple other things, just sort of review what's going to happen. We'll tell you what needs to happen if you decide if minimum wage happens to go up, federal minimum wage kind of goes up. Luckily, the program is built to easily kind of handle that. We're going to walk through setting up a garnishment, what it looks like between when the paperwork comes in to when your payroll runs. And then at the end, we're going to talk about some of the common things we've run into, like OCL release, refunding back employees, things like that. So we'll talk a little bit about everything. We do have the chat window open. So if you have some questions, feel free to go ahead and type in the chat. Either we will address it here in the audio, or we'll have someone from our team kind of go ahead and address the question for you. So enjoy yourself, sit back, and I'll kind of guide you through what's going to happen today. Let's take a look. I'm going to share my screen. Awesome. All right. You should now be looking at my infinite vision screen. Since I can't hear you, give me a big thumbs up if you can see my screen right now. Cool. I see a couple thumbs. That's always good. No shop teachers here, I guess. All right. So let's talk about garnishments. Where garnishments set up. Garnishments module 2-3 years ago, our office used to handle all garnishments from start to finish in our office. We kind of gotten away with that. We've worked with Tyler. They built out the garnishment module to a point where we feel comfortable enough for districts to be able to use it. So 2 years ago, we went through a huge push where everybody in Maricopa County that we worked with started processing their own garnishments as part of their normal payroll processing. So when a garnishment comes in, and I'm just going to show you some of the garnishment setup. So give me a moment here. I'm going to go into payroll. Maybe. All right, going to payroll, and garnishment stuff is under deductions and benefits and garnishment processing. And I'm just kind of explain these screens here really quick, and then I'll go into a couple of them and show you what's set up in there. Garnishment processing is all the garnishment case information. That's where you will actually put in information regarding the case number, how much is coming out of an employee check, what employee it's tied to, what garnishment deduction it's kind of keyed into. So a lot of your key processing moments in a normal day-to-day of garnishment work is going to be in the garnishment processing screen. The garnishment types will tell you what kind of types that you can process garnishments for, because there are different business processing rules for garnishments. For example, federal student loans, like a federal student loan handled by, say, the U.S. Department of Ed is handled differently than a federal student loan from, say,
Pioneer Credit.
Say like Pioneer Credit, which also handles federal student loans. There's different processing rules for those, so they need to be set up differently. We'll kind of walk through how that's set up. Garnishment hold status, that is just a sort of like a text reference field. Things like items whether that are suspended or they're pending OCL or kind of hold statuses. And garnishment plaintiffs is not used anymore. If you still have this on your screen, it's probably best if you just have someone go into Infinite Visions Administration and remove that item from your screen at all. We don't use garnishment plaintiffs anymore. The product now actually pulls vendor information as the plaintiff information, so that kind of takes the place of what this screen used to be used for. So let's go into garnishment types first. Kind of open this up. And in here, we see the different kinds of garnishments that you can process for. And I'm just going to go ahead and let's pop open this default student loan, just kind of walk through what these fields mean. The type information, we usually try and keep it standardized. So most people in Maricopa County, you're going to have the exact same sort of garnishment type in there. That's just so that when we speak with you on if we have to speak with you on a garnishment, you know exactly what we're talking about because you haven't changed the name or anything. So we do try and keep these standardized. So we have DSL, default student loan, third party. The category is a federal student loan. So again, that's going to be part of the processing rules. The basis, you have 4 options in here. You have a flat dollar conditional, a percentage, a flat dollar, or an IRS garnishment. Most of these, the student loans, things like student loans, writs of garnishment, things like that, those are going to be percentage based off whatever your wage basis is for that pay period. So there's a percentage amount associated with that. Flat dollar is if it is a fixed amount per pay period, it's always going to be a fixed amount. IRS garnishments, that you've really kind of taken into effect your tax tables at that point and what kind of exemptions you have for your federal tax. And flat dollar conditional, do we even see that used anymore?
Yes, $5 conditional is only used for child support.
Okay. That's right. The big one, right?
The big one.
Yes. So for this default student loan, it's going to be a percentage amount. And the salary minimum, and the way the percentage amount works in here is kind of backwards than what you might think it is. So the salary minimum is the percent of salary that the employee gets to take home. It's not the percent you are garnishing the employee on, it's the percent the employee must keep as a part of their take home pay. So since the max you can garnish somebody on something like a student loan would be 25% total, that means 15 at a time, but if you have multiple student loans, so the max would be total of 25% of all this person's garnishments. It will allow the employee to make sure it's never garnished below 75% of their wage. The minimum wage, right now, everybody should say $435. That is 60 hours a pay period times 725, which is the current federal minimum wage. And that's the dollar amount that gives it. So you cannot garnish an employee below minimum wage. So for some low wage earners, that you can run garnishments on them forever, and it will never come out because you can't garnish them beyond a certain point. If the minimum wage happens to change, say there's a lot of talk about moving to minimum wage, and we've kind of played around with it. Well, I say we, I mean Carrie. Carrie's kind of played around. What'd you find? What did you have to do to change that?
The only thing that we had to do in the minimum wage is just change it to whatever it is going to be in the future. So whatever the whole dollar amount is, you just implement it and change it from 435 to whatever the new whole amount's going to be. And it's easy as that.
So I think for $15 an hour, I think you came up with 900. Yes.
Yeah.
So if you put $900 in there, that assumes a $15 an hour minimum wage. So it was real easy to change. If we get to that point, we will of course instruct everybody, hey, this is changing. This is where you're going to go to change it. And then the subtract from wages. So this is probably the most important part of most of these garnishment types setup, because here is where you're going to go ahead and select in this entire list of all the deductions that your district offers, which deductions are exempt from the wage basis for this particular garnishment. So for example, a default student loan third party, so which deductions are we talking about would be exempt, Carrie?
Just the mandatory taxes, which is your federal, your state, the 2 FICAs, Social Security, Medicare, ASRS, and ASRS long-term.
Okay, so essentially anything required by law in the state of Arizona for you to have are going to be exempt from your garnishment wages. And that's probably the big difference between a third-party loan versus a US DOE Department of Ed student loan,
Correct.
because then that takes into effect like everything, right?
Everything, correct.
Okay, so
And always make sure you have the direct deposit unchecked on all of them.
yes, do not select the direct deposit deduction. It causes all sorts of havoc. So this is the basic setup. We're actually going to set up a new garnishment type in here because Carrie was talking earlier, and we've had a lot of things with wage assignments pop up, right? So what's a wage assignment?
A wage assignment could be Social Security. It could be from the military, just the little odds and ends that we barely see, which could be a wage assignment.
Okay, so we're going to add a wage assignment in here. What category do we use, Carrie?
That category would be we would need to add one. So.
Oh, for this part. Can you see that?
No, I can't.
All right,
Sorry.
so it's gonna be other.
Okay.
All right, so I'll add wage assignment in here. And the basis for a wage assignment
Is going to be a percentage.
Okay. And the salary minimum is gonna be 75. Can't garnish below that.
Yeah.
And your minimum wage is still gonna be $4.35. And what kind of deductions do we select in here? Is it all the required ones or everything?
Just the mandatory.
Just the mandatory ones. So anything like,
Your federal.
I'm going to do a filter by selection on mandatory.
Okay.
So state, ASRS, Fed tax, FICA. And there we go. So I have all the mandated deductions in there. So go ahead and click OK and save that. And boom, there you go. Luckily, this is one of those things that you really don't ever have to fix unless you add a new set of deductions. Say, for example, U.S. Department of Education, maybe you have a new health insurance deduction. Maybe you had Blue Cross Blue Shield and now you're switching over to United. Those are going to come in here unchecked, but you might have to go in there and check those to ensure that they are kind of exempted from those taxable wage bases. There was a question, are 403Bs, and let's see, scoot up here. How about 403Bs? Are 403Bs exempt from wages? So it depends on the deduction. For a lot of them, or for some of the ones like Department of Ed, if that deduction was in place before the garnishment came, I believe that is exempt from the garnishment. However, once that garnishment comes in, they can't add a new deduction. That new deduction for them is going to be part of whatever they're able to be garnished. So it's kind of hard. It kind of gets really tricky to set up at that point because the system doesn't handle that very well. So if you do run into a situation like that, let us know. We'll be happy to try and help you out. Let's see. And our 403B, HSA, FSA, Arizona tax rate exempt from wage minimum. So again, that depends. For a lot of these, for some of the deduction types, depending on the deduction type, and I really think it's just the Department of Ed, right?
Right, because they're pretty much the only one that takes everything.
Yeah. So if it's a student loan through the Department of Ed, those deductions could be exempt from the wage minimum. However, they do have to be in place before that garnishment comes in. So I hope that answers your question. For most types of garnishment, those things don't really, they don't really count because they're not a state required deduction. All right, I'm going to close out of here. And I'm just going to pop in hold status to kind of let everybody know what kind of hold statuses we have here. But we really only have 4. We've kind of found a way to kind of shoehorn everything into these as in infused categories as possible. So we bankruptcy, complete, pending OCL, and suspended. And we'll kind of get into what each one of these means once we get into setting up a garnishment. And then we'll pop into garnishment processing. Just hit apply selection. Just to kind of show you what this screen looks like. So in here is actually all the case information for the garnishments that are set up. So I'm going to pick Miss Candy Bar here. She is the one we probably pick on the most in our office. And I'll kind of walk through what some of these items mean here. So first of all, it's going to be, you have an active flag on there. So these are all really going to be active unless they're paid off or they've declared bankruptcy or something happens, in which case that garnishment is no longer active. The thing to keep in mind is that garnishments continue to come out until somebody tells you otherwise, especially for things like federal student loans and things like that. They will come out until they each either, if it's a garnishment that has a balance on there that you meet, or you get a letter from the creditor saying that garnishment is no longer valid or they're no longer going to be receiving money for that garnishment. So everyone's going to be active. The process order is the order in which garnishments come out. So garnishments So what happens if you have someone with multiple garnishments, Carrie? What happens in a situation like that?
You have multiple garnishments, it's pretty much a first come, first serve, unless it is a child support. Child support, but then that's where we can run into situations as well, because if the employee already has a levy in place and then receives a child support, the levy still needs to stay in place and the child support.
Wow, there's so many rules on this. So
It can get confusing if you run into that.
This is why we hired somebody who specializes in this kind of stuff, because there's a lot of rules like this. But as Carrie said, as a general rule, garnishments are first come, first serve. So if you have an employee that got served with 2 writs of garnishments and then a wage assignment, then it's going to come out in the order in which it was received.
It'll be the writ and a wage assignment.
Yep. So with the only difference on it is the big one would be child support, because the kid always gets paid. Kid will always get their money.
So if you have a writ in place and you receive a child support, then child support becomes first.
Yes. And so that's kind of goes into why we have these process numbers the way that we have. So when I talk about process number, these are the orders in which the garnishment is processed by the system. With the lowest meaning it comes out first, and the highest means it comes out last. So if you have someone with multiple garnishments, you could have, you could go and you can set up a process order 1, 2, 3, 4, 5 if they have that many garnishments, and then the first one would come out, and then the second one would come out, and then the third one would come out. What we've kind of done is we've kind of told everybody to set them up in increments of 5. So we have process order 5, 10, 15, 20, 25. So what that does is that gives you some wiggle room. So if you have someone who has a writ and then a wage assignment and then a child support comes in, you can change the child support to something like process order 3 without having to touch everything or mess anything else up. So it gives you a little bit of wiggle room in there. So we do recommend changing the process order in increments of 5, because there are instances where you're going to need to kind of tweak around with those a little bit. So just trying to make it easier for you.
Yes.
Case number, obviously that's going to come from the case information. So we'll have that in there. The type of garnishment. So you have the garnishment type. In this case, this is a writ, writ 25, which means 25% is going to come out. If it's IRS deduction, or if it's IRS tax garnishment, you're going to have an IRS exemption amount in here. You tie which employee deduction is for this garnishment case, and we'll kind of walk through how that is set up in just a moment here. So you're going to have the employee deduction here, and then you'll have the vendor for that particular deduction. So that's more like a sanity check. So you can see, make sure, do I have the right vendor? Is this going to the right payee? And then the employee deduction max, that is the max. That is the, I guess, the end balance.
Correct. Well, I wouldn't technically say end
balance. The end balance is garnishments seem to kind of go on forever because there's always interest and stuff that accrues. So it is, as we know it right now, that is the balance which this person knows. Okay. The decreed pay period amount, these are all items. If it's a dollar amount, this is a percentage. So we're actually going to put in 25% on here. And then you have your process status, your status fields down at the bottom. Process status is, there's come in 3 flavors: ready to process, ready to post, and never post. So never post is pretty much when that garnishment is done and you're never going to have to worry about that garnishment again. Ready to post and ready to process are just part of your normal, when you're running through payroll, you'll kind of run through these steps for you, and the system will manage these for you. As a general rule, you just kind of like leave it ready to process, which is kind of like the reset state. The hold status. So if there is a hold status associated with this garnishment, for example, if there's a bankruptcy and maybe everything, when there's bankruptcy stuff is filed, everything stops. Everything stops. And then what's it called? The trustee or the creditor, or who handles the bankruptcy?
Normally a chapter 7 bankruptcy courts, they're the ones that handle that one.
Okay.
But if you receive a bankruptcy, chapter 13.
Okay. So
17 stops.
Yeah, so everything could stop there, and then you'll kind of get instructions as what's going to happen from that point on. Complete, if it's completed and done. Pending OCL. What does OCL stand for again?
Order of continuing lien.
That's why we call it OCL.
Yes.
So OCL And we'll kind of get into it when we talk to the RIS. So we'll talk about OCLs in a minute. And then suspended, if there is a suspended item, say, for example, like what happened with student loans this past year. So a lot of student loans were suspended. Here's the thing, this hold status flag doesn't do anything. It is just an indicator to you of what the status is of this garnishment. You can have whatever hold status you have in here, and it's not going to affect the processing of that garnishment, but it does affect what you see on the grid. So just kind of do it to match up, whatever. And then the plaintiff will always match the employee deduction vendor. So here's all your PR deduction or your PR garnishment vendors. So this plaintiff is always going to match the deduction vendor. And the reason for that, this deduction vendor, whatever you select in this plaintiff area, is actually what prints on what's called a non-exempt earnings statement. The NEASE, N-E-E-S. It is a one-page report. It is only required in the state of Arizona. And it is required for those garnishments that require it. They're required, you print 2 copies. You print 1 copy for your employee and you send off 1 copy to the creditor with the check. And that's driven by this little checkbox up here. Here's a quick rule of thumb. If that checkbox is there, you need to check it every time. It's driven by the garnishment type. And so there are certain garnishment types where you're not going to see that checkbox at all. You don't need to worry about. But if you see it and it's there, you need to select that checkbox because they will come after you for the non-exempt earnings statement. They get really nervous if time goes by and they haven't received any information on how much this employee is actually earning. So they get a little iffy about that. So make sure you have that box checked if it's there.
And I would also like to add too, that when it's also in pending OCL status, no matter what, even though you're not releasing the check out to the vendor yet, the non-exempt earnings statement still needs to be mailed out.
Right.
By itself.
Right. So even if you're not sending a check, you have to send them the thing to say, hey, we are holding the money for you. We're just waiting for the rest of the paperwork to come in. So make sure you're still generating that and still sending that non-exempt earnings statement out. Some of the other tabs in garnishment processing, the dates tab, you're going to want to use probably these first 3 dates, definitely, whenever those particular documents come in. So the date that you were originally served, because there's a certain turnaround time between when the date is served and when you implement that or when you notify the employee. The date that it is answered. So if it is something that requires an answer, there's a time frame that you need to reply to the creditor or the court when you receive that garnishment or the employee information for that garnishment, and then the defendant notified so that you know, hey, I talked to this employee on this day and let them know and that they have a garnishment and now they have all the information they need. The other dates are really kind of informational. Not necessarily the pay period OCL received. You'll put in the OCL date in there when that item comes in. That is actually one of the fields that we track here for districts that we host for. So if there's an item, if there is a garnishment and it's gone too long without an OCL received, it actually sends us an email every Friday, so that we can start some follow up because it is beneficial for the employee if that OCL comes through. Because what happens is if it doesn't, and you have to refund that employee back their money, if the creditor already garnished you once, I can almost guarantee you they're going to go ahead and garnish you again, because that's just what they do for a living. But at that point, you add on additional court fees, you add on additional interest, and the employee has already paid, you've already taken the money from the employee's paycheck. You just haven't been able to release it. So we do want to make sure that people are following up. If you haven't received an OCL, what's the time frame for OCLs? It's 60?
90 days.
90 days.
90 days.
So 90 days between when you get a writ of garnishment, and that's the court ordered one. If you don't have an OCL, technically you have to refund the money back to the employee, but it is to the employee's benefit if we can find a way to just follow up with the creditor and make sure that gets out to them. Some of these other items, again, they're informational. You may use them or you may not. So if there's a quash or if there's a stay put in place for a garnishment, you can use that. Direct deposit stopped is sort of like a legacy field when we used to require that. We don't anymore. It's part of the bonus of being able to take this over at the district side is you don't have to stop direct deposit because there's no secondary processing. And then the last activity, that's actually managed by the system for you. So it kind of keeps track of when this item was last processed. Notes tab, where you can add little notes. So this is where you're going to want to keep track if you have any interaction with this employee for this case or with the creditor for this case, so that you have a centralized location where you know where everything that happens with this case is in there. And it's important to keep that information because there's a lot of, there's legal ramifications if things don't happen in a way that they're supposed to happen. So you want to make sure, hey, I talked to the employee on this day, I gave them the packet of information on this day, or I received updated paperwork or updated information from the creditor on this day, I put that in there. So make sure you're keeping track of all that information. In the notes tab, it's easy enough, you just add a new note. Add in what are your note information in there, and it actually ties your user ID into that so people know if you did it. And then documents. Documents, even if you don't have with Tyler Content Manager, and some of you may have Tyler Content Manager, but if you don't, Infinite Visions allows you to store documents in a lot of places within the program. The Garnishments happens to be one of those. And it is one of the places that we will almost always, no, I take that back, that we will always recommend for you to use. Oh. If you get any document associated with a garnishment, you should be scanning that document, saving it as a PDF or whatever you need to do, scanning that document and saving it and uploading it into the system in here. That way you have track of all the paperwork associated with that. And if we need to follow up with the employer, if our office needs to follow up with you, we can go into the system and say, oh, I see they received this document here, or I see they received this document here. So you can verify the numbers as needed. It is extremely important to remember to be attaching those documents. There is really no reason not to attach a document. If you are having issues, let us know, and we will do whatever we can to get you past those particular issues. Maybe there's a system issue. There's a couple settings in Infinite Visions that may be stopping you if you're not using it, but this is one of those fields that you should be using, and you should be using all the time, especially with the amount of collaboration that goes into a lot of the garnishment stuff. It makes it a lot easier for all the parties involved if we're all looking at the same information and we're not staring at something that's 2 months older than something that you got.
And it's less room in your file cabinet.
Yes, it's less room in your file cabinet. If you scan it in there, guess what? That's the record, you know? So keep that information in there. Transactions, this is of varying usefulness, but not necessarily so. So the transactions in here, so this will show you what would have come out if all things were perfect. This is the amount that would come out on that employee's paycheck. That does not take into account if there was something going on, maybe the employee lost hours, or maybe it's a new deduction, or maybe they hit a max, maybe they had interest on there. It doesn't take that into effect. So this could, there's very likely that this might not be correct. The best place to look for this sort of information is to actually go into the employee payroll journal or the employee journal, look up that deduction and just look up that deduction in history in there, because that will show you what actually came out of the employee's check and the pay period and the pay date for that particular item. That is the foolproof way to do it. And we'll kind of walk through that a little bit later. And of course, the change log. Everyone knows the change log traps everything you do, and it really kind of saves your butt sometimes. So that is the basic setup of a garnishment case. So let's walk through a couple things. I'm going to share a different screen here. Any questions so far? There was a couple items that popped up in the chat earlier, but I think we got them all. I'm not sure. Okay, so let's talk about a couple things that we've kind of run into. And I'm going to start with this one. So this is a wage assignment, correct?
Yeah, if you want to call it that. I don't like these ones.
All right, so this is actually from, this is an example of a wage assignment from a check loan company.
Or a loan company.
Some sort of loan company, like the old payday loan companies. Called Apex Servicing, and we've kind of redacted everything in here, so don't worry about it. So if you recognize a number, just don't say anything. Nobody will know. So this is an example of a letter you might get from a creditor requesting a garnishment be placed on an employee. So as you're looking through this information, what is the first thing you're looking for, Carrie?
First thing I'm looking for is as soon as I see it, I need to send a letter stating that it's not domesticated in the state of Arizona.
Okay, so when you say it's not domesticated, what does that mean?
That this could either go either way since it is a loan. It's a loan agreement, which pretty much is stating that it's okay for the employee to give permission to the payroll department to make these payments for them instead of having it directly taken, instead of them directly taking it out of and paying it themselves.
Okay.
So when these come about, there's really no liability on payroll. There's no legal laws to help protect the district and or protect the employee. It's just an agreement. So in the state of Arizona, garnishments that are not typical child support or federal need to be processed through the courts with an actual judgment of some sort, either a default judgment and or a judgment. And it needs to be served personally by a process server or a person of the court.
So this is a situation where this employee had, say, maybe a payday loan with some vendor in, I think this
one's in
particular,
Utah.
yeah, so this particular one's in Utah. So they had this payday loan from Utah and they didn't pay it or defaulted on it. And the creditor or the payday loan place is coming to the district and say, this person owes us money. Well, you are under no obligation to withhold money because you received a piece of paper saying you owe this person money.
Correct.
So when Carrie says it must be domesticated, it means this company is going to have to go through the courts of Arizona to request a writ of garnishment be placed on this employee. So when we see instances like this, and even though it may be tempting you, when it sounds really official and you look at the wording on it and it's almost scary to the point of saying, you must do this and you got to give us information. You don't. And Carrie has no problem telling creditors that they've done the wrong thing. So when situations come like this, we will outright reject it and say, this needs to be domesticated. This needs to go through the courts of Arizona and a writ of garnishment be issued for this employee. Other than that, I wouldn't do anything else with this. So if you run in a situation like this, let us know. We will be happy to help you take care of that and tell you what needs to happen. That way you don't go through the process. Don't even bother setting it up in your system. You can notify the employee, hey, we got this, but we're rejecting it because if they really want the money, they're going to go get that writ of garnishment. But you're not under any obligation to do that. And because you're not under an obligation to do that, it is, you err on the side of caution to not do that and wait for the official court paperwork to come through.
And these always are submitted at the school level. They are not sent through our office whatsoever.
So these will come into your payroll or HR people. These will come in by fax or by mail or something like that. So if you get something like this, should turn around and call you, or can they just reject this outright?
I do have the official, domesticated
Okay.
letter. So
we have some official communication that
Yeah.
we'll send to them on the district behalf.
yes.
Okay, so let us know if you run into a situation like this, and Carrie's really good at rejecting people. So be happy to send off that letter for you. So don't be intimidated by the fact that something looks really official and looks like a lot of numbers and unless it comes from a court. And if it comes from a court, it's going to come through a process server. It's not going to come through your fax machine. And it's not going to come through your email at all. So what does it look like when it comes through a court? So this is an example of a writ of garnishment actually served by a process server in our office for districts that we handle garnishments for. And let me go back and kind of explain stuff. So if we have anybody watching this that we don't handle garnishments for, there are some processes that you may handle a little bit differently, or you might have people handle differently. So I am going to be kind of specific about some of the processes we have. These kind of should mirror the processes you may have at your district. So if you handle your own garnishments, or if you're out from outside Maricopa County, or even from outside Arizona, there might be things that you handle a little bit differently. So this is sort of like a general rule as to what our processes are, and should be taken as sort of gospel for anyone outside of our little realm of influence here. So a process server for our purposes is always going to come into our office. And we require that all process services all process servers or all writs of garnishments for districts we work with will always need to come to our office. And they all look basically the same. They have the basic standard court looking thing on here with the defendant's information. The other thing we look for is it has to be served to the Maricopa County Education Service Agency or Maricopa County School Superintendent's Office.
Yeah, I'm not picky about that.
And it has to have the district name on there. It has to have both. So they can't just go fishing and say, we know their check is processed by Maricopa County. So here you go. That's not how that works. They're going to have to do the footwork and tell us what district this is for, because we'll reject that before they even leave our office. We have people trained to look at these and like, oh yeah, no, you're missing district's name and you got to take and go away. It will go down and there'll be more information on here. You just need to make sure every time our name appears in here, there should be the district name in there. So all that stuff, again, we will be checking these paperworks for you. You won't have to worry about it. If you are a district that handles these services on yourself, so you're going to see that slightly different. So obviously there's a lot more paperwork that goes along with this. I believe it's like, like 20 pages long or something like that is the total packet of paperwork, because there's multiple copies of everything.
Yes.
There's
Arizona state statute requires a boatload of copies, which don't need to.
Yes, and we do check for those copies. So if they come into our office and they only have 2 copies of something that requires 4 copies of something, we're like, yeah, you're going to need to go hit up a copy machine or something, because we're not going to take it. So the statute is very specific on exactly how many copies of every item needs to be served for a process garnishment. Luckily, we've been doing it long enough that most process servers, they kind of know already when they walk. I mean, it's their job. They're going to have to serve it anyway. So some of them will know. They'll come in and like, I know I don't have enough stuff, but I just need to show that I came in and you rejected it type of thing. So that happens here and there. But this is kind of what an official document looks for. And again, this will kind of go through our office. When we receive items like this, we actually have a garnishment information form that we're kind of fill out. That we'll send over, and we'll get some information from you about the employee. It's really a lot of just employment verification at that point. We need to make sure the employee still works there, they still get money, and whether or not they're terminated or not.
And verify 2 keys of information need to be verified. It either needs to be the employee name and the social, which we all would rather have the name and the social security match, or the name and a home address. And that typically too could be, off kilter too, because people do move around a lot.
Yeah.
So normally we just need 2 forms of identification in order to match a garnishment.
And we want to try and be as specific as possible, because we have run into instances where we received a garnishment for an employee with a similar name. And it kind of it went through the process, and it was difficult to kind of backtrack and get that taken care of, or help, watch the employee try and take care of that, because all the information we had matched, but it was just a very unfortunate coincidence that everything just kind of seemed to line up. So do try and give as much identifying information as you can, so we can make sure we have the right person, or at least get the creditor to make sure they have the right person. And then through garnishment processing in our office, there is a fee charge, which is pretty much just document handling and preparing all the stuff and making sure you don't have some of the headaches that we've seen people run into. So you'll get one of these with the garnishments that come through our office.
And these only need to be filled out for active employees, not for terminated employees.
Yes. So what happens if you get a garnishment and an employee no longer works there?
If it is served on the district side, then, or not, I shouldn't say served, received on the district side, either through their mail, email, or fax, they can go ahead and just fill it out with the termination date, the answer, because majority all garnishments have an answer of all types of forms. So they can just fill it out with when they were terminated, and they can just mail it back to the creditor. They don't need to forward it to this office. They can just handle those on the district.
So if you get someone employed, hey, this employee no longer works here, I'm just going to turn around and just reject it outright.
Yeah.
Okay. So save yourself the trouble of scanning anything in. Just go ahead and return that and say, sorry, this employee no longer works here.
Yeah.
And that can happen, especially right now. There's a lot of, I don't want to say district turnover, but Funding is in such a way where districts are really shedding a lot of employees that they may have had previously. So make sure you can take care of that yourself. All right, so I'm going to stop sharing this, and we're going to go back on over to Infinite Visions. I could tell you right now, looking at the time, we are going to run over our allotted hour, but there are things that I definitely want to get through before we leave today. So we are going to run a little bit over. So I'll just let you know. So just shoot a quick email over to your boss or people that you maybe had a meeting with. Hopefully we can get through maybe by 11:20. I want to say that's my goal right now. Some of this stuff is important enough. All right, so I'm going to start sharing my other screen here and go back to Infinite Visions. And we're going to set up a garnishment. Garnishments is really, setting up a garnishment is really just a step-by-step process. And you have to follow the steps in a certain order or it just doesn't work. And you'll know this because you'll try to do something and it just doesn't work. So I'm going to exit out of this main screen. So I'm going to say I get a garnishment. And we can use that writ that we saw a little bit ago. And I totally closed it, so I don't know who it's from. Writ and judgment.
It is from Gerstel Law Firm.
Oh, Gerstel. Everybody knows Gerstel by now.
Yes.
All right, so we get a new garnishment information. Say we get a garnishment served at our office. We put together a packet of information. We send it over to you. The first thing that needs to happen is the vendor needs to be set up in purchasing and payables. So we're going to go into purchasing and payables. And vendors. And in vendor maintenance. Obviously, you probably won't have access to vendors maintenance to put that information in there. So there's probably someone that you'll need to request that information just because separation of duties. But make sure you can show your AP people this video and show them how to do it. So instead of Gerstel, I'm going to use Apex when that's the one we got.
U.S. Collections.
What is it?
U.S.
Collections? Oh yeah, let's do that one. U.S. Collections. So one of the things we want to point out is the vendor name that we're going to have you set up in here may not always match the writ of garnishment that you receive for that employee. And there's a reason for that, because the money that you pay for a particular garnishment that is generated out of payroll for any garnishment may not be going to whoever's name appears on the writ of garnishment.
Correct.
So say you had some title loan place or something like that, and that you've received a writ of garnishment for some title loan. But when the OCL comes in, that order of continuing lien comes in within the next 90 days, it might have somebody else on there. It might have maybe it goes through their lawyer, or maybe it goes through some other collection company. That is where the checks actually have to go. And that is where the checks will actually be payable to. So if you receive information from us on the garnishment setup and you look at the vendor, it's like, wait, this vendor is different than what I'm seeing on the writ of garnishment. That is because we've worked with these creditors long enough that we know where this check is going to be issued out to. And we're trying to help you save some steps there. So if you get one, feel free to question it. Hey, I just want to double check on this, because what's going to happen is you're going to start taking out that garnishment immediately the moment you start processing that paperwork. So those checks and those invoices are going to be generated to, in this case, U.S. collection. But when the OCL comes in and the OCL now says a different name than U.S. collections, what do? You have now a bunch of invoices made out to one vendor, but you have to make it payable to another vendor now. So we're just trying to make it a little bit easier. Like I said, Carrie's had 20 years experience doing this, so we've kind of seen most everything by this point. But again, if you have a question, feel free to ask. But when we send over that vendor information, that is what we're basing that on, to make sure that your system reflects the payees that you're actually paying for these, and not necessarily what is on that particular writ of garnishment. So I'm just going to put in a blank street information in here because I really don't need it. 512 phone number. Let's use our phone number, 602-372-4833. Email garnishments@maricopa.gov. That's Carrie's email address. You need two checkboxes that you need to check on here. First of all is going to be the payroll vendor down here at the bottom, and then the payroll garnishment vendor. That's going to be down here at the bottom. The payroll vendor checkbox means that this vendor will show up in deductions and benefits maintenance when you create the vendor. The payroll garnishment vendor checkbox, make sure that it comes in garnishment processing when you select the plaintiff. So you have to have both of them checked at all times. We have had a couple of districts ask about W-9s for garnishment vendors. You're never going to get a W-9 out of a garnishment vendor. That is whatever your policy happens to be for these, you just kind of need to ignore it. It's not something the district is paying for. It's something that the employee is paying for. So, and it's not a 1099 situation. So just make sure, don't bother with the W-9 information. And I'm going to close this dialog after update and click OK. So now we have our garnishment vendor in here. So I'm going to go ahead and close this screen. The next step is we're actually going to create the garnishment deduction for U.S. collections. So I'm going to open up deductions and benefits maintenance. If I scroll down here, I can see all my garnishment deductions are in here. And we use a naming convention that all garnishment deductions start with GARN. That way they all kind of bundle together and we know that they are garnishments. Some creditors may have names that maybe look like an additional like 403B type situation. So we make sure we have garnishment in there so they all bundle together. And there's two ways that you can create a garnishment deduction. You can copy one of your deductions that's already in here. So I can go up to highlight one, I can go up to actions and choose copy deduction, and it will create a copy of that deduction in here. If you are doing this right now, and I would say you probably almost get into the habit of never doing this with a garnishment deduction. The issue comes up is if you are operating in 2 fiscal years. So if you've already done the payroll rollover for your fiscal year, if you do a copy deduction, the garnishment deduction does not get correctly created in the new year. And so what you have to do is you need to create the deduction from scratch in the current year. And then that deduction will also get created in the new year for you. And it will be created in such a way that it will give you much, much less headache. And we found this over years and years of trial and error, trying to figure out what the heck is going on here. So try and stray away from the temptation to copy a deduction. So we're just going to add a new deduction in here. And the name is going to be Garn under U.S. collections.
For you inside districts, make sure it's GARN space hyphen space in the name. Otherwise, you will find Mike all over you on that.
You know, and it's really just more of my OCD than anything. And when you have deductions that are all named in a very similar way, it makes this very easy to filter and find certain things. So that's why we kind of stuck with that. So where's that U.S. collections? There it is. The type, I hit this. All garnishment deductions are regular, not tax exempt, all of them. And that is just saying it's going to come out of the employee's paycheck or the employee's gross wages at some point after all the deductions or all the applicable deductions anyway. So it's always going to be deduction regular, not tax exempt. Category, you will probably have a category in here for garnishment. If you don't, you should add that deduction category in there. If you've handled garnishments in Infinite Visions, you probably already have it. Your employee liability offset is going to be an employee voluntary liability. And your employer liability is going to be a non-employer liability. And non-employer expense. Simply because your employer is not going to pay your garnishment for you. So we're just going to put these in here. And if you look at the sort of funding mask on here, these are just sort of pass-through accounts anyway. I know some of the Tyler documentation I know came out one time says just use EE voluntary liability, just go all the way through. That to me just seems inconsistent with the way deductions should normally be set up. So make sure you use that non-employer, non-employee liability. The other information, W-2 information, you can leave blank. The check boxes you need to double check. So you'll need to make sure that include on check. You allow sync from prior year is another big one. You got to make sure that that box is checked because it will mess up a lot of stuff if you don't have that box checked. And then
especially with the rollover.
Yeah, especially with the rollover, and you might be making changes in 2 years. So make sure you allow that sync from prior year. And then at the bottom, the maximum basis for garnishments is going to be lifetime because it will just come out until they've either hit that amount or they no longer have garnishment. So it's always going to be a lifetime max. The other item on here, the one time from lump sum for a garnishment record, that box will be unchecked unless it is a child support deduction. Child support deduction is the only item that you will ever have a garnishment with that box checked. And the reason for that is garnishment, child support deductions are calculated on a monthly basis. So regardless of the fact that they're getting 5 checks in one lump sum contract at the end of the year that's going to last them through the summer, it's really still just one check.
Right.
It is up to the employee when they get that lump sum check to make sure that his child support or her child support is paid through those summer months. It's just not going to come out through this school district. It's going to come out directly from the employee. And that is an employee responsibility. That is not a district responsibility. You can't go ahead and tell them and say, here's all your money. Child support came out once. Make sure you're paying for your kid for the rest of the 2 months that you're not working here. So make sure that's set. So we're going to go ahead and close this dialog after update. Click OK. All right, so we created the deduction. I'm now going to go to employee deductions and attach this to an employee. Did I come in the right screen? Ah, there it goes. Okay. All right, so I'm going to add a deduction in here, and I'll just pick an employee off the top. Did I click it? I did. All right, so we'll pick Baker right here at the top. Her deduction is going to be the new U.S. collections one. Oh, sorry, Garn U.S. collections. It'll be active. Reference will be, you can put the case number in there if you like, or put some sort of reference number in there if you like. It's not required because that's going to be in the garnishment case, but it might be helpful for you at some point. So you can put that information in here. The start period number should always be 1 on garnishment deductions, always be 1. So if you had employees that you set this up and you're in a habit, it's like, oh, well, they started on pay period 16. I'm going to put 16 in there. When you do the payroll rollover, keep in mind that that start period 16 is going to roll over with that deduction. So you want to make sure that even though they may have started at 16, maybe they start at pay period 2 next year. You can make sure that item gets reset. And I'll show you how to do that in just a second. But as a general rule, garnishment deductions should always start at pay period 1. And then if they happen to get paid, then the money will come out. If they don't, then it doesn't. So you don't have to worry about it. And then this information, the employee amount and the employee percent are going to be blank. And since this is a writ of garnishment, there will actually be an employee maximum amount here.
Okay.
So let's say $3,500.
Okay.
So that means once this employee has paid $3,500, this deduction will stop coming out. At which point we'll kind of update it at some point because we'll get quarterly interest reports from the creditor and things like that. So we'll have to update some of the things. But for now, we're going to put it $3,500. And I'll just close this window after update. Don't put anything else in here.
Yeah.
Garnishment processing will take care of that for you. So go ahead and click OK. All right, so now Miss Mary Jane Baker now has her garnishment. Once I have that, I'm going to close and I will go to garnishment processing. And I will add a new garnishment case in here. Yeah, it's Mary Jane Baker. Active process order. Remember, like we said, we're going to start off with 5. We'll just put in, say CV 2021
dash
1, 2, 3, 4, 5. Okay. Garnishment type. Say it is a writ. EE deduction. And once you pick an employee, we'll only show you the deductions that that employee has. So,
and if you also notice in the right part of your screen, it also popped up the box for the non-exempt earnings statement.
oh, there it is. Yeah, I totally missed that. So let me change this over to something like, yeah, bankrupt. Oh, apparently that has one. There it goes. All right. So now the checkbox isn't there. So now I'm going to go back and select writ, and the checkbox magically appears. And again, like I said, since it's there, you got to check it. So we're going to go ahead and check that. And then the percentage, 25%.
And then also in that instance too, when sometimes a employee decides to have a modification to their garnishment by law on Irs Garnishment, it can only drop from 20 or 25% down to 15 sometimes, but rarely less than that. You would automatically just change the 25% down to 15 or whatever is authorized by the creditor to change.
Yeah, so you'll get paperwork for that. So don't, like I said, don't do anything unless you have paperwork to back that up. But it is not unusual to get an adjustment on a garnishment. Maybe they're not making enough, or maybe there's some hardship or things like that. They can get that kind of knocked down to 15%, but default is going to be 25%. Okay. Hold status. Since this is a writ of garnishment, we're going to choose pending OCL, which means we received the writ, but we haven't received the order of continuing lien saying that we can withhold that money from the employee, or saying that we can, distribute that money. And then our plaintiff is going to be U.S. Collections. We'll put in our serve date. Let's say it was today. We'll make it easy. We're going to do our answer today. And the answer is pretty much, yes, this employee works here. And notified employee. And of course, I will upload my documents here. And let's go ahead and upload a document. I do have some documents. No, never mind. They're in a spot that I don't have access to them. So I would upload my documents on here. Close this dialog after update, and then click OK. And that's it in a nutshell. That's a garnishment setup. There's a lot of little steps, and they have to be set up in the right order for it to work. But there's not a whole lot of complexity into it. You're really just kind of like doing the same thing over and over again. So how does garnishment processing actually work in payroll? So let's exit out of this screen. Now in payroll, and unfortunately there isn't a payroll step for garnishment processing. They really just kind of threw it in there after the fact, and you have to go up to the actions menu for it. So we'll kind of walk through that really quick. We'll go into payroll processing, process payroll. And I'm going to change this to pay period, let's do 11. I'm going to do set pay period default, because this is the pay period I happen to be working on. Everyone's seen this screen time and time again. Your hours entry, accrue leave, calculate employee. So I'm just kind of going to go through the motions here really quick, just to get down to the point where I needed to be. Luckily, it's a training database, so there's not a whole lot going on here. I don't think your payroll runs quite this fast. Okay. So it is what we've kind of been telling people since we started working with garnishments is that you have to imagine garnishment processing as pay period step 3.5. If you think of it as step 3.5, you will never miss it, hopefully. Knock on wood. Yes. So there is no step in here. There's no button for it. But whenever you finish processing step 3, your option should be to go up to actions. Down at the bottom of the actions menu, there is an option that says open garnishment screen. So I'm going to go ahead and open garnishment screen. It's going to pop me over into garnishment processing. I'll hit apply selection, bring up all my cases. So these are my garnishment cases. And the steps are really pretty simple. You're going to go to actions. You're going to compute the garnishments. So what this is going to do is it's going to take whatever. Sorry, I skipped. Okay. The first thing you do is go to ready to process, because what you need to do is you need to sort of reset the screen. So if you have items in here that are kind of like mixture of ready to post or ready to process, depending on where you are in the process, maybe you were kind of just testing a garnishment, make sure it came out right. You should first come in here and do ready to process, which kind of resets everything on here and changes everything in the grid to this ready to process status. After that, you will compute the garnishment. We're on pay period 11. And what this will do is this will actually, for these employees that have garnishments, will compute all of their deductions and then compute their garnishment deductions on top of that. So it's separate than a normal step 4 processing, because there's an extra step in there for the garnishment people. So I'm going to click OK. Garnishment records have been successfully computed. Now you can see there's a couple items in here that change as ready to post. So these are the items where employees are making money on this particular pay period. So there was an amount that was calculated for them. Once I've done that, I'm going to go to actions and post records. Post records to pay period 11. And this will actually post it to the payroll journal and the garnishment deductions for these employees. And let's see if I can show you what that looks like. So who had one? Crystal Ball, I believe, had one. So we're going to exit. Crystal Ball had one for this Midland funding test.
Adjustment too.
Tommy Two-Tone had one too. All right, so I'm going to close out of here. I'm going to go into employee deductions really quick, just so you can see what this looks like, because sometimes this will kind of freak people out. Oops. So garnishment, Midland funding. Hopefully there's money associated with it. Okay, good. All right, so in here, you can see that there is now an employee amount in here. By default, what the garnishment processing is doing is it's calculating the employee amount, and then it's writing that employee amount into the employee deduction. And then that's why the box is grayed out. So that's why you can't change it anymore. So it's putting in here $407 that it's going to go ahead and adjust the employee's pay for. And this active flag will turn on and off throughout the entire process. So don't freak out if the active flag on the deduction is on or off, because the system will manage that for you. As long as the case is active in garnishment processing, the system will manage all that for you. So it does put the dollar amount in there. Just to confirm, I'm going to go back into payroll processing. And at that point, since I've run step 3.5 now, I can do calculate pay period. And what was, yeah,
sorry.
So do a calculate all. And I'll run through my normal payroll warnings because this is a training database, so there's stuff that's wrong. Performance. Yep. Oh, sorry, I blew count.
Yeah,
It did show me a message. The message says garnishments have been posted for this pay period. And another report. And done. So now pay period step 4 is done. Now I could tell you from experience, there is probably not a payroll person out there that's gone through the payroll processing menu the first time on the first try. It is so often that you have to go back and fix something, or you have to adjust something on an employer, you have to put in more time or put in a leave doc or something like that. The only thing you need to remember is never forget pay period step 3.5. So regardless of if you're making an adjustment to an employee that has a garnishment, you will always need to run pay period step 3.5. So if you go back and you reset steps and you go through this again, after you hit 3, you're going to go back up, process open garnishment screen, and go through that entire garnishment processing thing again. Every single time.
And you also need to do step 3.5 if you make an adjustment on a non-garnished employee as well.
Yeah. So
and you still have to
if you touch step 3, you need to go touch 3.5 is what it comes down to. Just see. At the end, on our end, the amount of the, okay, so a question popped up. On our end, the amount of the calculated garnishment doesn't show up as a negative number in employee deduction. So that normally is just a positive number. We actually had to do an adjustment on that for something else. So that's why it shows negative, but yours is going to show a positive number in there. A negative number on the deduction actually refunds money back to an employee. So yes, what you are seeing is normal, Mary. Okay. Once you've kind of gone through here and you kind of make sure all your payroll reports are run and all your amounts are calculated, it will generate, I think maybe we should just go through and run this really quick. You know what? No, I know we have invoices out there for garnishment. So let's go take a look at that. Nobody's seen this before. No.
Not today.
okay, you can close your report view. It's fine. Oh, for the love of. So let's go take a look at some invoices really quick. All right, so I'm going to go into payroll. If you haven't been into payroll invoice processing, you're really kind of missing out on all the fun that goes along with processing payroll. So payroll invoice processing, and these are, I believe it's step 9 in there in the payroll processing menu that actually generates the deduction invoices. When those invoices get generated, they go into invoice processing. For most days, you never have to go into invoice processing because the money just gets generated out. You'll go into voucher processing, attach it to the voucher, submit the voucher, get the checks, and then you're all done. So in invoice processing, if I open this up, I'm just going to hit apply selection and filter by ready to pay. So here's a couple of garnishment deductions down here. So I'm going to filter by selection just so I can see which one is working on here. All right, so we have a couple of garnishment deductions down here, both of them for $496. Garnishment deductions, we talked about the OCL a little bit earlier. So the big thing where you really kind of need to mess with the garnishment deductions is when you have a situation where you received a writ of garnishment for an employee, but have not received an OCL for it. So again, you have a writ of garnishment goes through the courts. The creditor has 90 days to submit an order of continuing, have to submit the paperwork to have an order of continuing lien issued for that garnishment. At that point, you are authorized to release that money to the creditor. So you're going to start taking out the money from the employee's check right away, but you can't send that check to the creditor until you receive the OCL. So what happens when you have multiple employees who may have the same creditor and maybe you haven't gotten the OCL for one? So what you have to do in cases like that is you actually have to come in here and you have to manually split your deduction invoice for that particular creditor. And Gerstel and Capital One, Gerstel is pretty common for that. They'll have, most of you have heard of Gerstel, or what's one of the other ones? Midland Funding.
Midland Funding,
Yeah.
Peter.
Yeah, so there's a lot of them that you might need to split. So you can have multiple employees that maybe owe money to Midland Funding, but only one of them has the OCL. And so if you have a $496 check, but only 200 of that you're authorized to release, you have to go in here and you have to fix this invoice. So an easy way to do that, you go to highlight the deduction invoice. And I like to choose the copy. You can manually add an item in here, but I do like to use the copy thing, and then I can change the number. So I can choose the copy, a particular invoice. And it does pop in. Where did it pop up? Is it done? Yeah, here it is. So it did pop up the information. So say I'm only, sorry, I got a district robocall. Okay, so in here, I will change the invoice number because you can only have one unique invoice number in your system. So we're going to change the invoice number so we still kind of tie it back to the original. So I'll put it in there for -1. And then I am going to change this. Instead of $496, maybe I'm only authorized to release $200. So I will change this to $200. Oops, I screwed that up. To use the AP invoices. And actions, set detail amount, changes to $200. So I took my $496 invoice and I changed it to 200. And so this is the one that I'm actually going to attach to my payroll voucher or my deduction voucher when I submit it to be printed. So that way, when you have these items and you need to split out those OCLs, you will do this for really any single split that you need to do. So you're going to have a $200 one, and then you might have one for the remaining $296 ones for the other ones. So I'm going to go ahead and click OK. I'm going to split this again. There's my other copy. I think I chose the wrong one this time, but I'm going to put -2. And so I already paid $200 before, so I'm going to change this to $296. $296.32. Accept detail amount. Changes that. So now I have successfully split the invoice for this particular vendor. You have to remember to go to the original invoice for this vendor, and you have to remember to make sure that it is suspended. So if we go in here, let's say this one here, we'll go up to actions, highlight this particular invoice, actions, and suspend. This will suspend the selected invoice. Do you want to proceed? Yes. And then that will stay suspended because that's you split out the invoice, you went ahead and paid for it. That will take care of to make sure the creditor gets all the money that they need to have in the right time, and that they have everything that they're legally entitled to now that you have the OCLs for one of those.
Correct. But you also need to suspend the one that you're not releasing to the creditor.
Yes, I forgot about that. So say, I think we said that the $200 one was the one we were authorized for. So I'm going to go ahead and suspend this $296 one. Thank you for reminding me.
Oh.
So by default in payroll voucher processing, you only see you only see invoices that are not suspended. So some of the invoices don't pull up in voucher processing. So kind of save yourself the headache of accidentally paying somebody. And then when you get that OCL, when it comes in, 30, 60, 89 days from now, you can go back into invoice processing and you can unsuspend the item by just opening it up and then clicking OK. And then it returns as to ready to pay. And then you can go ahead and issue that as one big lump check over to the creditor. And again, like Carrie said earlier, just because you're not sending a check to every creditor, you still have to send the non-exempt earning statements to those creditors to prove that you are withholding money and the employee is earning money at your district. So make sure you have that information in there. That's how you handle split OCLs. Any questions on OCLs?
Other than I know a lot of them don't like doing that.
Oh yeah, that sucks. It's a suck process,
Yes.
That's for sure. It is incredibly manual. And I don't believe that is specific to Arizona, is it? OCLs are not specific to us. They're
No, other states do.
Yeah. So I think it's maybe one of those things that we've kind of dealt with for long enough that we just didn't bother to request it to be fixed. But it really would be nice if there was a way to split that OCL up.
Washington, I know, is a state that you have to hold for a certain amount of time.
Okay.
I think Colorado too.
Okay.
If I recall.
Okay.
It's been a long time.
So that's how you split out the OCLs. The last thing is, what do you do if you need to refund an employee back some money? So maybe you don't get the OCL, and even though you've tried to follow up with the creditor, they're just not on top of their game, and for some reason they don't like money. So if you have to refund it back, and there's even instances where we've had you received a garnishment for an employee, and then they've made a settlement with that creditor at some point that was outside of your control or outside of payroll, or maybe they got their tax money back. And they went and paid off their garnishment. So any checks that you have for them got returned back to you at the district. The way you would do a deduction or a garnishment refund in Infinite Visions is very similar to a way that you would do a normal deduction refund or reduction adjustment or deduction adjustment back for an employee for a lot of other deductions. The trick is garnishment processing handles that kind of wonky sometimes. And so we found that we've had to do it one of two different ways. And we do have them sort of documented somewhere. So if you're having some issues with it, you can either do it one or two ways. And I'll show you really quick. The easy way and the preferred way to do that is to go to employee deductions. And we'll pick Miss Baker. Oh, come on. Okay. Garnishment for Midland, our U.S. collection. So let's say we issued a check for $200 for this garnishment, and then 2 months from now, you got that back saying, nope, this employee paid it off with their tax refund or with their STIMI. or whatever, maybe they sold a car or something. I don't know. They sold a kidney. You can go in here under actions and you can go to deduction adjustment and you can add a deduction adjustment or the next available pay period. And let's just pick one out of here. It doesn't really matter. And the employee amount, so you have to have a negative amount in there. Remember, a negative deduction amount refunds money back to the employee, a positive pulls it out. So let's say we're gonna put negative $200 in there. Type is, we're just say overpayment, reference, adjustment, and the date today. Description cannot be late, okay. Garn refund. Can't type either. Click OK. Garnishment refund, I'll click OK here. So that when, and it does say right here in bright red letters, hey, there was a refund or there was an adjustment for this deduction. So if you need to troubleshoot, you can look for there. But when I run that particular pay period or pay period 16 or the next available pay period, it's going to try and refund that money back to the employee through the deduction like it should. You will have to make some adjustments on the garnishment case for it. So we go into garnishment processing. And we'll pull up the US collections case. You need to make sure that the garnishment is still active or it's not going to come out. So you make sure it's still active, but you will have to remove the percentage amount or it's going to overwrite the amount that's in the employee deduction. So you'll zero out the percentage amount. If there's a decreed dollar amount, you'll zero that information out. You'll leave everything else kind of the same, and then you'll click OK. And then when you process your payroll, that should refund the money back to the employee. We have run into instances where that didn't work. And I'd like to tell you, we spent hours and hours and hours trying to figure out why exactly certain things worked in some situations and why it didn't in the other. It just comes down to, if it didn't work one way, do it the other way. They both kind of work. The other option you could use, and you probably use this more for a flat dollar amount, is if it doesn't work in the deduction adjustment, you can use the override amount field here. And you can also use that to help refund the money back. So if you need to, if the deduction adjustment wasn't working, you can put negative $200 here. And that one would work. It's one of those things where if the stars align and the planets are in synchronous orbit and all this other jazz, one will work and the other will not. So we've just gotten to the point, it's like, well, if that didn't work, we're going to do it this other way. It is one of those things that after you've run step 4 and you're looking at your payroll reports on step 5, you're going to want to go in there and verify that that deduction was handled correctly by payroll processing, so it doesn't get messed up. So always verify garnishment deductions. Even if you have 200 pages of deduction detail, take a look at your garnished employees and make sure your garnishment and deductions are all what they needed to be. And then you should be set. Anything else, Carrie?
Payroll journal, when I asked when the creditor balance statements
Yes.
are coming in quarterly.
One last thing, and this is more of a reporting request than it is anything, an actual process. On occasion, typically every quarter, we will get a balance sheet or a report from the creditor saying this amount of interest has accrued on this many employees for this dollar amount. So we'll ask you, what did they pay for the last 6 pay periods? And then how is the deduction set up? The easiest way to do that is in payroll processing, go to the employee journal. I'm sorry, in payroll, go to employee journal, pull up your employee. We're going to zero out the pay period. I'm sorry, just delete that out. Choose deduction journal and click OK. Then we're going to find their garnishment and we're going to do a filter by selection. And what you will do, kind of modify this. They don't really care about the pay period number. They do care about the pay date though. So we're going to switch this over to pay date. And so what you will do is you will get the last 6 pay periods of the pay date on here. You will get a little screen prompt print of this screen, because this screen will show you exactly what came out of that employee's check, not the transaction screen in garnishment processing, this screen. So you always use this screen when we ask for verification. And then once you got a screen print of that, you're going to open up the deduction, just kind of double click in the blue deduction information here, and it's going to pop up in a second or not. So it would pop up and you would take a screen print of the deduction set up for that particular employee. And that's it. And just send that back to us. And then we'll tell the creditor, or we'll take a look at it. And if the balance needs to be adjusted, then we'll let you know how to adjust that balance. If it doesn't, then we'll just kind of let it go. But I think that's it, Carrie. Is there anything else you want to tell these people before we let them go?
I would just like to add that sometimes, a garnishment will end and we receive another case with the same exact case number, vendor, everything. They found out later months that maybe there was some still remaining balance that need to be done. Please do not use the same vendor. You need to set up a whole new vendor. Say it would be like Midland Funding Peter, then you set up another vendor for Midland Funding Peter 2.
Okay.
Because we want to make sure that we can justify a start and stop per garnishment. So if you have a duplicate case number, and it just keeps records clean.
Okay.
And research cleaner if you end up with duplicate case numbers.
Okay. So anytime you get a new, almost if you get a new garnishment, you're just going to make the new vendor for it, even if it's the same case number, because you need to make sure that you can document and keep all those items separate.
Correct.
Okay.
You
Good.
don't lump them all into one.
Good information. And as always, if you have questions or you're curious as to how things work, or if you want to know a little bit more, the Carrie is here. Our office will actually be back full time on the 3rd. So we'll be here all the time at that point. But other than that, Carrie's available by email, or you can give her a call. You can reach her at phone number 602-372-4833, option 3. Or you can contact her at garnishments@maricopa.gov, and she'll be happy to answer your questions. That is it for now. I know it was a little bit longer. I try to keep these under an hour, but some topics just, if we don't give you everything, it does a disservice to not give you everything. And we'd rather let you leave with a full bucket of knowledge than just a knowledge of how to do things up to a certain point. So thank you, everybody. I know it was a lot to go through. The video will hopefully be up in a few days here, definitely maybe by next Monday or Tuesday, but have a great week. Have a great weekend. We have EPARS next week. Maybe we'll see you then. Other than that, have a good time. Thank you for joining us.
Thank you. Bye.
How long have you been working here?
5 years next month.
You're going to be due for like a pin soon. I've avoided the pin for like 10 years now.
How did you avoid it?
Just don't go.
Oh, okay.
You don't know whose pen this is.
You better not sit there and click it, because I know you. You got after me and told, yeah, throw it across the room. Thank you.
It's gone now.
All right.
There it goes.
There we go.
Son of a, who turned the volume down on this thing? I work with jerks. They turned the volume down on the mixer. I can't hear anything. So I'm sorry, Dane, about saying it was your problem earlier when it truly was my problem.
Put it down.
Just can't have nice. You don't let me do nothing, Carrie.
Next thing you know, you're going to start beatboxing and making your own.
Hip, hop, hippity, hippity, hip, hip, a hop, and you don't stop, a rocket to the bang, bang. So you said up, trust the beat to the rhythm to the beat.
God, I haven't heard that one in forever. Are they recording us now?
Oh, yeah.
So everything we just discussed?
Yes. Everything's on.
Oh, great. Why didn't you tell me this?